The first time they tried to erase me, I was standing right behind my own chair, the CEO's chair to be precise. Black leather, high back, empty. It sat at the head of the long glass table like a throne no one wanted to acknowledge, and I stood behind it with my hands loosely folded, as if I were part of the decor, as if I weren't the one who had built every process that kept this corporation breathing. Above us, the city pressed its face against the windows, steel, light, motion. Below us, thousands of employees trusted a system they'd never see. And inside this room, 7 alphas slowly saturated the air. Board meetings always carried pressure, but this one was different. It was thicker, warmer, the kind of invisible weight that slid under your skin and made your pulse stutter. Alpha fields didn't announce themselves. They seeped. The temperature crept up half a degree. My inner ear rang faintly, like feedback from a distant speaker. Even the scent in the room shifted. Ozone, expensive cologne, the sterile bite of dominance sharpened by anticipation. I inhaled through my nose, controlled, counted, let it pass through me. I was good at that. Let's begin. My Uncle Richard's voice cut cleanly across the table. Calm, polished, possessive. He sat 2 seats to the right of the empty chair, close enough to imply authority, far enough to avoid challenging it directly. Richard Hale had the kind of silver hair people trusted, and the kind of smile that made subordinates forget to ask questions. He didn't look at me when he spoke. He didn't need to. Everyone here knew who actually ran the operational spine of this company. They just didn't like to say it. Reports opened, screens lit, projections scrolled. I tracked the flow automatically, quarterly outputs, logistics bottlenecks, projected expansion corridors. If this story caught you, subscribe. More are waiting. My systems, my architecture, the internal machine of Hale Global, unspooled exactly as I'd designed it to. Halfway through the financial block, the door slid open. Conversation dipped. Alpha pressure shifted. The new investor entered without hurry, suit dark, movements economical, presence precise in a way that had nothing to do with pheromones and everything to do with attention. Callum Reeve. I'd read his portfolio. Aggressive acquisitions, silent restructures, a reputation for buying dying corporations and teaching them how to bite. He should have looked at the empty chair, or at Richard, or at the other alphas measuring him like rival predators. He didn't. His gaze lifted and locked on me, not curious, not polite, assessing. Something subtle clicked in my chest. Recognition, maybe, or the quiet irritation of being seen when you're trying very hard to be useful and invisible. Callum took his seat across the table. Still didn't look away. Richard cleared his throat. As I was saying, the operational delays in the Pacific sector are not delays, I said, stepping forward half a pace. They're controlled decelerations. If we push the supply chain now, we'll destabilize 3 dependent networks and… Ethan. Richard lifted a hand. Not sharply, not loudly. Final. The word landed heavier than any alpha field. Dismissive, familial, absolute. A couple of board members shifted. One of them avoided my eyes. Richard continued, seamlessly. We will need a new framework. One more suitable for our future direction. Future direction. I tasted the phrase like something slightly spoiled. I stepped back into my place behind the chair. Heat crawled along the back of my neck. Not embarrassment. Not yet. Containment. Across the table, Callum's fingers stilled against his tablet. His eyes flicked, briefly, to the empty chair, then back to me. He didn't interrupt. He didn't challenge, but something in his posture changed. The faint tilt of his head, the narrowing of his gaze, as if he just watched someone pull a thread and decided to follow where it led. The meeting dissolved eventually into murmurs and quiet side discussions. Alphas dispersed in small clusters, already trading futures in low voices. I gathered my files. Callum's voice was softer than I expected, not weaker, just tuned lower. I turned. Up close, he smelled faintly of winter air and ink. Not the sharp dominance of most alphas. Something cleaner, deliberate, "You're running this company from the shadows," he said. "A beat, but shadows don't own shares. People do." And for the first time that morning, something inside my ribcage answered back. My office was 3 corridors away from the boardroom and a different universe entirely. No glass walls, no panoramic view, just concrete, muted lights, and a desk that had been customized and recustomized so many times, it no longer resembled anything the designers had intended. Screens lined one wall: live logistics, regional performance maps, internal traffic flows, the real pulse, the part no one photographed. This was where the company actually existed. I closed the door and let my shoulders drop exactly 1 inch. That was all the permission I ever gave myself. People like to imagine Heir Global as a hierarchy, alphas at the top, everyone else arranged neatly below. But hierarchies were from marketing decks and leadership seminars. What I had built was a nervous system. I didn't command it, I wired it. When the Eastern distribution grid collapsed after the typhoon 5 years ago, I hadn't slept for 56 hours. I'd rerouted 3 countries' worth of supply through secondary ports, rewritten predictive software on the fly, and personally negotiated a ceasefire between 2 regional pack directors who were seconds away from tearing into each other over warehouse access. No press release mentioned my name. When a hostile acquisition threatened to split our European branch, I dismantled the financial logic of the takeover point by point, until the opposing board dissolved their own vote out of sheer mathematical shame. No one invited me on stage. When an internal alpha feud nearly triggered a mass resignation event, pheromonal destabilization spreading through 3 departments, I'd locked myself in the server room and rewritten the personnel flow algorithms so the packs would never intersect again. They called it a natural cooling of tensions. I called it architecture. I pushed back from my desk and walked into the adjacent server room. The air dropped 10 degrees. The low hum wrapped around me like something alive. This was the skeleton. Fiber. Power. Data. I rested my palm against the glass of the primary rack. "Still here," I murmured without humor. A memory rose, uninvited. Smoke in the West Wing. Emergency lights. My uncle's hand heavy on my shoulder, steering me past executives and into a sealed room. "You're good at this, Ethan," Richard had said. "At holding things together. Let the alphas handle the visibility." I'd been 24. Proud. Grateful. Starving to be useful. Obedience dressed as trust. Still felt like trust when you didn't know the difference. The door chime sounded. "Come in." Matthew slipped inside as if he belonged anywhere he entered. My cousin wore charm the way other men wore tailored jackets, lightly, instinctively, never buttoned all the way. "There you are," he said, smiling. "Uncle Richard was looking for you." "I'm always here," I replied. He laughed, as if I'd made a joke. Matthew leaned against my desk, eyes flicking over the screens without comprehension. Big day. New investor. New direction. He lowered his voice. "It's exciting, don't you think? The future opening up." The word again. Future. "What future is that?" I asked. He hesitated just long enough to tell the truth without meaning to. "A visible one." I watched him for a moment. His easy posture, his untouched hands, the absence of strain in his scent. "Richard wants to see you," he added, "about restructuring, about what comes next." After he left, the room felt larger, emptier. I returned to my desk, but didn't sit. On one screen, internal resource flows pulsed in steady rhythm. On another, executive access logs updated in real time. I frowned. 2 permissions had shifted in the last hour. Subtle, buried. A rerouting of oversight channels that bypassed my direct review. It was small. It was precise. It was not mine. I shut down the main panels and stepped into the night. From the balcony outside the operations floor, the city stretched like a living circuit, headlights as data streams, towers as nodes, the distant harbor blinking in coded patterns of arrival and departure. I'd built something like this once. On paper. On screens. In bloodless models. I'd assumed the system was stable. Now, standing alone above the hum of millions of lives, I felt it. A shift, not a break, a redirection. And for the first time in years, The architecture I trusted no longer felt like it was answering only to me. The negotiation lounge was designed to make people forget they were being evaluated. Low ceilings, warm light, acoustic panels disguised as art, a private coffee bar humming softly in the corner like an offering. It smelled of roasted beans and money. Callum was already there when I arrived, standing at the counter, sleeves rolled just enough to suggest informality without ever committing to it. "Do you always meet investors in rooms that feel like confessionals?" he asked. "Or am I special?" "I only bring the dangerous ones here," I replied, setting my tablet on the table, his mouth curved. Not quite a smile. How comforting. We took opposite seats, not across the table, at the same angle, an arrangement that implied conversation, not confrontation, for exactly 6 seconds. "Your Pacific slowdown," he said, stirring his coffee he hadn't tasted yet. "It saved you 6.2% in cross-regional waste. And cost you 4 headlines." I looked up. "Our waste metrics aren't public." "No," he met my gaze, "but your shipping bottlenecks are. And someone who understands your internal architecture can reverse them." I felt the first thin thread of irritation slide up my spine. Investors don't usually open with operational analysis. Investors who plan to stay decorative do, he said mildly. "I'm not one of them. Alpha for decoration." The phrase surfaced uninvited, and I hated that it fit. I leaned back. "Then what are you?" Callum studied me over the rim of his cup. "Someone who doesn't like buying dyeing machines without understanding where the fractures start." "You bought us," I said. "No." He set the cup down, untouched. "I bought access." There it was. The clean incision. Not flirtation. Not performance. Precision. "You bypassed the European Expansion Council last quarter," he continued. "Moved authority to a secondary operational node, then dissolved it 3 weeks later. That was a temporary structure. It destabilized 2 alpha directors and rerouted their decision power into logistics. They were blocking growth. They were blocking you." The words hit harder than they should have. I exhaled slowly. "You've done your homework." "Your homework," he corrected. "Someone else's narrative." I watched him now. The stillness, the way his attention didn't waver, the absence of alpha posturing, no dominance projection, no territorial theatrics. It was unsettling. "You're not supposed to see that layer," I said. "I know." A faint spark lit his eyes. "That's why I wanted to talk to you." I folded my hands. "About what?" "About why your internal permissions shifted this morning." My fingers tightened before I could stop them. "That's not public either. Neither is the access code that authorized it," he said. "But it belonged to someone who doesn't understand your systems well enough to hide the footprint." My irritation sharpened into something colder. "You think someone inside is undermining me?" "I think," Callum replied, "that someone is preparing to sell a product they didn't build." "And that product is?" I asked. He let the silence stretch. Then, "Your chair." For a moment, the lounge noise faded. The soft hiss of the espresso machine. The distant murmur of other negotiations. The quiet breath of the city behind the walls. "Careful," I said. "That's a serious accusation. I don't accuse." His gaze didn't move. "I trace." I stood. "Then trace elsewhere." "My role is operational. The board handles succession." "Your role," Callum said, finally rising, "is the only reason this company can survive a hostile transition. And transitions don't happen without intent." I should have dismissed him. I should have thanked him for the concern and returned to my controlled architectures and invisible victories. Instead, I found myself asking, "Why tell me?" His mouth tilted, just slightly. "Because if they're planning to replace you, they're underestimating what you actually are." "And what is that?" Callum's eyes held mine. "Not staff," he said. "Structure." Control tightened around my ribs. Interest followed it. And somewhere between the two, something that felt dangerously like anticipation began to breathe. The first headline reached me through a reflection. I was passing a glass wall when my own face fractured across a dozen embedded news screens. Heir Global under investigation. Internal documents suggest operational misconduct. For a moment, I didn't recognize the man staring back. The sharp stillness. The pupils already contracting, calculating damage before emotion had permission to exist. I stopped. Around me, the upper floors shifted. Assistants slowed. Voices dropped. People pretended to check tablets while watching the reflected headlines update. Source claims, high-level access. Source claims, systemic oversight failure. My internal channels lit like a struck grid. Security requests, legal flags, emergency pings from regional directors. I turned and walked, not toward my office but toward crisis. The crisis room was built like a bunker. No windows, no art. A circular table surrounded by vertical screens streaming live data, global feeds, internal alerts. The air always smelled faintly of ozone and burnt coffee. Richard was already there. So was Matthew. They stood at the center, framed by projections of leaked documents, partial logistics maps, clipped internal memos, fragments of proprietary algorithms. My work. Richard's hand rested lightly on Matthew's shoulder as if he were guiding him through something educational. There you are, Richard said. Relief. Perfectly calibrated. We were just beginning to assess the situation. I wasn't notified, I said. You were, Matthew replied gently. But the channel must have lagged. Everything's very chaotic. I looked at the access board. 3 of my primary permissions were already grayed out. My mouth went dry. Richard stepped closer. Ethan, this is delicate. The board agreed it would be best to temporarily redistribute some oversight. Until we understand how this happened. How it happened, I repeated. Yes. These documents were pulled from your operational domain. They were pulled from the system, I said. Which means the breach could have occurred anywhere upstream of my layer. Richard's expression softened, the way people did when they were about to remove something sharp from your hands. Of course. But perception matters, and right now perception is that your structures were too open. Too open. Matthew cleared his throat. I've offered to help coordinate damage control. Just until this settles. He touched one of the screens. A file rerouted. Through his credentials. My stomach dropped. You don't have clearance. I do now, he said, smiling faintly. Temporary. For continuity. Continuity. Richard met my eyes. We need to present stability. The investors are already nervous. Callum Reeve requested a briefing. I'll handle him. I already have, Richard said smoothly. He understands the necessity of visible leadership in moments like this. Visible. The room tilted, just slightly. Alpha pressure rolled outward. Not as a wave, but as a closing geometry. The screens felt closer. The ceiling lower. I became aware, absurdly, of the fact that no one was standing beside me. We're protecting you, Richard added. From speculation. From misinterpretation. This will pass. His hand landed on my arm. It felt like being pinned by something that smiled. I pulled away. I need full access restored. In time, Matthew's eyes flicked between us, bright. You should get some rest, Ethan. You look overwhelmed. The word was placed like a courtesy blade. I left before I could say something that would fracture the room. The corridors outside were louder. Phones ringing. Rapid footsteps. Whispered names. I passed another screen. Anonymous source links leaked to internal operations head. My title, not my name. My role. I felt heat crawl under my skin. Not alpha pressure. Fear. This wasn't a misfire. This was positioning. They weren't questioning me. They were replacing me. And for the first time since I'd learned how to build systems instead of asking for space inside them, I understood something with chilling clarity. They weren't testing my work. They were testing how easily I could be removed from it. The investors' lounge sat 2 floors above the executive wing and pretended neutrality the way diplomats pretended peace. Dark wood. Filtered light. Soundproofing thick enough to swallow arguments. A place designed for men who moved numbers instead of furniture. Callum stood near the far window, city glow outlining his shoulders. He didn't turn when I entered. You're late, he said. I wasn't invited. That's rarely stopped you. I closed the door behind me. The room sealed with a muted click that felt uncomfortably final. They've limited my access, I said. If this is another performance review, save it. Callum turned then. His expression wasn't controlled. It was stripped, as if he'd set something down before I arrived. This isn't an investor meeting, he said. It's a confession. I stilled. He gestured to the seating area. But I remained standing. Say what you came to say. Callum didn't waste time. I wasn't sent here to invest, he said. I was sent to observe a beat and to report. The words landed exactly where he meant them to. To whom? I asked. The consortium that holds Heir Global's debt architecture. They place controllers when internal shifts destabilize a structure. His gaze didn't move from mine. I am one. You're a corporate spy, if you prefer theater, he said. Yes. Cold moved through me. And you knew, I said quietly, about the leak, about the vote that's coming. I knew someone was preparing to initiate a power transfer, he answered. I didn't know it would be this crude. I laughed once. The sound surprised both of us. So my family staged a public execution, and you're disappointed in their technique. That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean? Callum inhaled. Slow, deliberate. I meant I've been watching the data flows, the board alignments, the permission shifts. This isn't opportunism. It's orchestration. You're confirming what they're doing, I said. Not why you're here. His jaw tightened. I was sent to document the transition, he said, to ensure the new leadership structure stabilized investor confidence, to certify that the replacement was viable. Replacement. I tasted the word like blood. And am I asked, viable? No, Callum said. You're inconvenient. Silence spread. They expected to find a bottleneck, he continued. An overextended beta holding together a system too big for him. Someone who could be removed with minimal structural loss. His eyes sharpened. They were wrong. My anger flared hot and sudden. You don't get to assess me after the fact. You've been cataloging my failure. I've been tracing your architecture, he cut in, and realizing that removing you doesn't transfer power. It collapses it. I searched his face for the alpha dominance, the detached cruelty. Found neither. Then why tell me now, I demanded. Why break protocol? Callum hesitated. Just once. Because I've filed reports on people like you before, he said quietly, and watched them get erased. The admission threaded something unfamiliar through his voice. I won't do it again. We stood there, the city breathing beyond the glass. You were supposed to let this happen, I said. Yes. And instead, he replied, I'm telling you where the fault lines are. Distrust coiled tight in my chest. So did something else, not relief. Alignment. You don't rescue systems, I said. You stabilize them. Callum met my gaze. Then let's stop them from breaking the wrong one. The words settled between us. Not a promise, a proposition, and the beginning of a war neither of us had been sent here to fight. The boardroom felt smaller than it had a week ago. Same glass walls, same steel table, same city burning quietly beyond the windows. Different air. Alpha fields were never visible, but they were measurable. By the way your skin tightened, by the way your lungs worked harder for the same amount of oxygen, by the way silence gained weight. Most people thought dominance was social. It wasn't. It was neurological. Alphas didn't just lead. Their nervous systems projected. Subtle electromagnetic patterns tied to pheromonal output, hormonal spikes, microexpressions. Alone, it was background radiation. In groups, synchronized, it became something else. A pressure field. I took my place behind the empty chair again, and felt it close. The first symptom was heat, not warmth. Heat, as if the air had thickened into breath you had to chew. The second was sound distortion, the faint high ring behind my ears, like standing too close to heavy machinery. By the time Richard opened the session, my hands had already gone cold. The council today was heavy with alphas, more than usual. The distribution was wrong. Too many dominant signatures clustered too close together. It wasn't accidental. Fields stacked. Frequencies overlapped. They were building density. I anchored my breathing. Slow. Measured. Betas weren't passive in these environments. We were regulators. Our nervous systems adapted, absorbed, redistributed. We didn't project fields. We stabilized them. That was why packs didn't tear themselves apart in enclosed spaces. Why negotiations didn't end in blood. I'd spent my life functioning as a living circuit breaker. But circuits could overload. Halfway through the second report, a sharp pain lanced behind my eyes. Not a headache. A spike. My vision shimmered. The screens at the far end of the table blurred, then snapped back into focus too sharply, edges haloed in light. I shifted my weight. The field tightened. Richard was speaking about governance reform, about transparency, about renewed confidence. Every alpha at the table leaned subtly inward. Convergence. My pulse tripped. For a moment I couldn't tell where my own scent ended and the room's began. The pressure didn't crush. It intruded, sliding along nerve paths, nudging reflexes, urging submission where none existed. I clenched my jaw. I would not fold. But my body was already reacting. Sweat along my spine. A tremor in my left hand I hid by curling my fingers. I stepped forward. If we adjust the oversight flow through Matthew's temporary clearance, we destabilize 3 regional nodes and... The words fragmented. The room tilted. Heat flared white behind my eyes. Someone across the table inhaled sharply. Alpha interest. Alpha attention. Dangerous. Ethan. Callum's voice cut through the field like a break in current. Not loud. Placed. Sit. I didn't. He stood instead. Slowly, deliberately, the movement alone shifted the geometry of the room. Attention redistributed. The synchronized field fractured as several alphas instinctively reoriented. Callum stepped closer, not to the chair. To me. He didn't touch. He didn't need to. His presence was a counter-frequency. Not dominance. Control. You're over-concentrating, he said calmly, to the table. If you collapse your stabilizer, this discussion becomes a liability risk. This is an internal... This, Callum cut in, is a bioenvironmental mismanagement issue. Silence rippled. Your clustering is inducing neurological strain, he continued. And if Mr. Hale loses regulatory function mid-session, every decision made here becomes contestable. A few board members shifted. The field thinned. Not vanished. Breathable. I swallowed. Hard. The ringing receded to a dull edge. Callum glanced at me. Brief. Checking. You don't get to use him as insulation, he said, evenly. Especially not while questioning his authority. Something in the room recalibrated. Alphas leaned back. The density broke. Air rushed into my lungs like permission. I exhaled, slow and shaking, and only then realized my fists had been clenched hard enough to hurt. Callum remained standing a second longer. Then he sat, not across from Richard, beside the empty chair. Beside me. The meeting resumed, altered, cautious, watched, but I barely heard it. Because for the first time since this began, I was not absorbing the room alone. I wasn't a circuit. I was part of a system. And when I finally let myself look at him, gratitude moved through me with a force that had nothing to do with biology and everything to do with choice. The Hale house had never been meant to be lived in. It had been designed to be inherited. Stone corridors, dark wood, portraits of men who had never asked permission to exist. Every surface carried history like a warning. Even the light seemed older here, filtered through leaded glass that dulled everything into permanence. Dinner was served beneath a chandelier that had outlasted 3 economic collapses and 2 generations of resentment. Richard sat at the head of the table. Matthew took the seat to his right. I was placed halfway down between a great aunt who smelled of cedar and obligation and an empty chair that felt intentional. Conversation flowed the way it always had, about markets, about stability, about how fortunate we were to be part of something enduring. No one asked how I was. They asked how operations were holding. How's the crisis containment going? Richard inquired, carving his roast with ceremonial patience. Contained, I said. Matthew smiled. We're all so grateful you've kept things running, especially now, when the company needs to start thinking beyond maintenance. Maintenance. I watched him. His hands were unmarked. His nails perfect. He wore confidence like a suit he hadn't paid for. And toward what? I asked. Would you like it to think? The future, he said lightly. Visibility, leadership, the face of the next era. Eyes slid politely in his direction. Richard dabbed his mouth. Ethan has always been invaluable. But roles evolve. The company is entering a phase that may require a different kind of presence. Presence, not competence. A cousin down the table added. Something more inspirational, laughter murmured. The alpha pressure in the room wasn't overt. It didn't need to be. Family fields were quieter, more invasive. They didn't dominate. They defined. I set my fork down. So, I'm infrastructure, I said. Annie's vision. Matthew flushed faintly. That's not what I meant. No, I replied. It's exactly what you meant. Richard's gaze sharpened. There's no need to dramatize this. I'm not, I said. I'm translating. Silence, stretched. Ethan, Richard said gently, you were never meant to carry the public weight of this legacy. You're too internal. What you've built will remain. But structures don't need to be seen to function. The words were delivered like reassurance. They landed like erasure. Something hot and brittle rose behind my sternum. I wasn't born to hold your coat, I said. A breath caught somewhere at the table. Richard's smile thinned. No one is saying that. You are, I replied. You always have. You just use nicer language. I stood. Chairs shifted. I gave this company a nervous system, I continued. I kept it alive while you curated appearances, and now that someone wants the skin without the bones, you're telling me to step back and be grateful. Ethan, I won't disappear politely, I said, and turned before my voice could break. The night outside was cold and clean. The estate gardens lay dark and geometrically obedient. I didn't remember crossing them. I only remembered breathing too hard and hating that it felt like weakness. Footsteps crunched behind me. Ethan, Callum's voice. I stopped beneath an old ash tree, bark rough against my palm. He didn't touch me. He stood close enough that I could feel the heat of him without the pressure. They taught me my place before I learned my name, I said quietly. I just didn't realize it was still there. Callum's gaze softened in a way that unsettled me more than any dominance ever had. They taught you a function, he said, not a limit. I laughed. Once, it wavered. They're not the same? They become the same, he replied, only if you never question who assigned them. I closed my eyes. For a moment, I let myself feel it. The anger, the grief, the fear that without their definition, I might have none. What if they're right? I asked. What if I'm only background? Callum stepped closer. Not to claim, to align. Then they wouldn't need to erase you, he said. My breath hitched. We stood there, close enough that the cold couldn't reach between us. Close enough that I became acutely aware of the space he didn't cross. And for the first time in years, I wondered, not what role I served, but what I might choose. The roof was never meant to be used. That was what made it safe. No lounge furniture, no branded glass, just concrete, wind, and the low mechanical breath of the building rising through vents like something sleeping beneath our feet. The city at night didn't glitter. It burned. Callum stood near the edge, coat unbuttoned, hair disturbed by the wind in a way I doubted he ever allowed indoors. I joined him, keeping a careful distance from the drop and a less careful one from him. This is where you come when you don't want to be overheard, I said. This is where I come when I don't want to lie, he replied. The wind tugged at my sleeves. At the silence. I told you part of the truth, Callum said. In the lounge. I waited. I was not sent to stop this. I didn't look at him. The city felt easier to hold in my vision. I was sent to make sure it succeeded without destabilizing the company. There it was. The final alignment of every odd detail. Your reports, I said, were meant to prepare the ground, he confirmed. To reassure the consortium that replacing you wouldn't fracture the system. I closed my eyes briefly. And now, I asked. What did they say? They say the architecture is sound. He paused. They say the operations head appears strained. That the transition is proceeding. A thin smile. Bitter. They believe I'm doing my job. I turned then. And are you? Callum met my gaze without flinching. No. The word didn't echo. It grounded. I was trained to observe, he continued. To identify structural keystones. To remove emotional variables. To ensure capital survives leadership. And I said, am a variable. You are the structure, he corrected. Silence took on weight again. Not oppressive this time. Expectant. I was supposed to let them corner you, he said. Let the board formalize the narrative. Let your removal look like necessity instead of design. And instead, Callum said quietly, I watched you stabilize a system they don't understand. I watched them build a field meant to crush you. And I realized something I wasn't trained to account for. What? That some architectures are not transferable. The wind surged, snapping fabric. The city's distant sirens rose and fell like signals. I'm not offering rescue, he said. I'm offering alignment. He reached into his coat and withdrew a slim data wafer. Your uncle and cousin are moving faster than they should, he continued. They've accelerated the internal vote. They're building external justification. And they're underestimating what you can prove. I took the wafer. It was cool. Heavier than it should have been. What is this? Permission trails, capital flow anomalies, a partial map of the coalition backing them. His jaw tightened. And the locations where they're careless. You're burning your position, I said. Yes. For what? Callum held my gaze. For choice. The word lodged under my ribs. Once we move, he said, I can't shield you and play controller. I become visible, opposition. And if we fail, we don't disappear. I finished. We get dismantled. Yes. Fear flickered. Honest. Sharp. It didn't stop me. What do you need from me? I asked. Access, he said. And the willingness to stop surviving inside the system you built. I looked at the city, at the lattice of light that mirrored my own designs, then back at him. You're not asking me to take a chair, I said. No, Callum replied. I'm asking you to take a side. The wind surged again, carrying with it the faint ozone of the upper air. I extended my hand, not for dominance, for alignment. He took it, not to claim, to seal. And in the space between the building and the night, we began to draw the lines of a war neither of us could step out of again. The building after midnight was a different organism. Lights dimmed to operational minimum. Elevators whispered instead of chimed. The executive floors emptied of voices and filled with the low, constant breathing of systems that never slept. We had taken over a small conference room adjacent to the data wing. No glass walls, no branding, just a scarred table, portable screens, and the soft blue glow of live documentation. Preparation didn't look like power. It looked like accumulation. Callum moved through financial layers with surgical speed, isolating transaction clusters, flagging irregular capital migrations, reconstructing relationships that had been designed to never appear adjacent. I worked the internal side, permission trails, redundancies, system behaviors under manipulated oversight. We didn't speak much. We didn't need to. Hours compressed into a narrow band of time marked only by the arrival of fresh coffee and the slow degradation of my hands. My fingers shook when I tried to reroute the third oversight bridge. Pause, Callum said quietly. I'm fine. You're not. I exhaled through my teeth and forced my hands to still. They didn't. The past weeks had hollowed me out in ways adrenaline could no longer disguise. Sleep had become something that happened accidentally. Food something I forgot until my vision dimmed at the edges. You can't stabilize the system if your own nervous field collapses, Callum said, not unkindly. I've done it before. Yes, he replied. And it nearly cost you function. I leaned back, closing my eyes for one count longer than necessary. When this fails, I said, they'll present it as inevitability. Callum didn't interrupt. They'll say the beta burned out, I continued. That the company outgrew its architect. That succession was a kindness. My jaw tightened. They've already written the story, and we're revising it, he said. I opened my eyes. His expression was calm, but not detached. Focused. Intent. They control the room, I said. The optics. The narrative. They've been preparing this longer than we have. Yes. And still you're here. Yes. Silence pooled. On one screen, a chain of shell investments linked into a recognizable lattice. On another, board member correspondences formed a map of quiet consensus. My uncle's name appeared more often than it should have. So did Matthew's. They've scheduled the vote for tomorrow morning, Callum said. Under the guise of emergency governance review. Hostile vote, I murmured. Formalized. I watched the system shift as we layered our counter-architecture beneath theirs. They were good. We were different. I won't survive this intact, I said suddenly. Callum's gaze lifted. Not publicly, I clarified. Even if we succeed. They'll fracture my authority. Turn me into an argument. A risk. Probably. He agreed. And you, I added, will lose your position. Your protection. Yes. A thin smile touched his mouth. That was always temporary. I studied him. You're very calm for someone burning a career. I'm very precise, he corrected. There's a difference. I almost laughed. Almost. We worked until the edges of the city began to pale. When I finally stood, my legs nearly failed me. Callum was there without urgency, a steady presence that didn't touch but somehow held. The system around us hummed. Ready. Outside, the night thinned. Inside, everything went quiet. Not empty. Taut. The kind of stillness that only exists when something enormous has decided where it will fall. The boardroom was full before I entered. Not crowded. Concentrated. Every seat was taken. Every screen active. The city beyond the glass looked distant. Unreal. Like a simulation someone had forgotten to update. The empty chair waited. So did the field. The moment I crossed the threshold, the pressure closed. It was heavier than before. Denser. Deliberate. This was not negotiation density. This was execution density. Alpha signatures overlapped in practice synchrony, weaving a neurological enclosure that narrowed perception, accelerated heart rate, primed compliance. My skin prickled. Heat pooled beneath my ribs. The faint ringing in my ears returned immediately, sharper now, threaded with distortion. They had tuned this. I took my place behind the chair. Richard didn't look at me when he spoke. Thank you all for convening on such short notice, he said. Given recent developments, the board will be initiating an emergency governance procedure. On the central screen, a heading appeared. Operational Confidence Review. Matthew sat 2 seats down from him, hands folded, expression appropriately grave. Due to breaches of internal security and concerns regarding system oversight, Richard continued. We must assess whether current operational leadership remains viable. My pulse accelerated. The field tightened. My lungs resisted their own rhythm. I felt it then. The first real slip. Not mental. Somatic. A sudden vertigo. As if my center of gravity had been quietly moved 3 inches to the left. I steadied myself against the back of the chair. They noticed. Interest sharpened. Attention leaned in. Someone inhaled. The pressure surged. Ethan Hale, Richard said, finally turning. This is not an accusation. This is a necessary examination. Necessary. The word reverberated oddly, bending at the edges. I request that you step away from active operational command pending the board's determination. The room pulsed. My vision wavered. White halos bloomed around the screens. For one dangerous second, the weight in the air felt like it might actually push me down. This is how it happens, a part of me noted distantly. Not with force, with environment. I drew a breath. It scraped. Another. My hands trembled openly now. I was losing regulation, and then something shifted. Not outside. Inside. A memory surfaced, not of systems or crises or long nights, but of pressure itself. Of years spent absorbing rooms like this, of how alpha fields moved through me, were diffused by me, redistributed through me. I had never been a wall. I had been a conduit. The realization landed with startling clarity. I wasn't failing to suppress the field. I was over-focusing it, feeding it back into myself. The architecture was wrong. I closed my eyes, and instead of bracing, I opened, not emotionally, structurally. I let my nervous system do what it had always done for this company. But consciously, I imagined the room not as a source of force, but as a network. Nodes, currents, feedback loops. I shifted my stance. Not back. Forward. The pressure didn't disappear. It redistributed. I felt it move. Across the table, along the walls, through the space between bodies. The ringing in my ears thinned. The heat spread outward. Several board members stiffened. One blinked rapidly. "What is he doing?" someone murmured. I straightened. Fully. Richard's brow furrowed. "Ethan, I built the stabilization protocols this company runs on," I said. My voice carried. Not loud, aligned. And I built them because uncontrolled dominance destabilizes systems. The central screen flickered. Callum stood. "I've initiated a parallel data stream," he said calmly. "You'll want to see this." Files opened. Timelines unfolded. Permission shifts. Capital migrations. Board correspondence. A lattice of quiet intent illuminated the room. "This," Callum continued, "is the pre-vote orchestration of a forced transition, designed to present operational failure as inevitability." Richard's expression hardened. "This is highly inappropriate." "And highly traceable," Callum cut in. Matthew's composure cracked. "Just a fraction. Enough." "I was asked to step away," I said. "So allow me to step forward instead." I moved. Not to the side. To the chair. The field recoiled. Not from dominance, but from recalibration. I placed one hand on the back of the leather. "I am not a bottleneck," I continued. "I am not a service layer. I am the regulatory architecture that allows this board to function without tearing itself apart." I looked at them. All of them. "You don't replace that," I said. "You either work with it, or you dismantle the company trying." The screens behind me blossomed with projections. System simulations Callum and I had prepared. Without my stabilizing algorithms, internal alpha conflict curves spiked. With them, the system leveled. "You planned to remove me," I said. "And keep what I built." Richard "This is manipulation." "No," I replied. "This is disclosure." Silence thundered. The field thinned further. Uncontrolled. Visible. For the first time, the room did not feel like a cage. It felt like a circuit. And I was no longer the only one carrying the current. The room didn't look the same. Not because anything physical had changed, but because the illusion had. Where there had once been synchronized authority, there was now interference. Alpha signatures no longer aligned into a single dominant field. They clashed, overlapped poorly, spiked and receded without rhythm. The nervous system of the room was misfiring. One of the Western directors pressed his fingers to his temple. Another exhaled sharply, jaw tightening. Without my stabilizing loop feeding back into the system, the board's collective presence fractured into competing currents. And suddenly, everyone felt it. "Reduce projection," someone snapped. "I am," another replied. "Strained. It's not responding." Richard took a step forward. Then another, "Too fast." His voice rose. "This is not how governance works. We are not subject to—" A sudden wave of scent surged through the room, sharp and uncontrolled. Matthew flinched. The color drained from his face. He gripped the edge of the table, breathing uneven. "What's happening?" he asked, too quickly. No one answered. The screens continued to scroll. Callum's data lattice widened, tracing the coalition that had been shaping the vote. Capital clusters, board-side agreements, external assurances already drafted. A replacement architecture, built on a fantasy. "This is engineered sabotage," Richard said. "He's destabilizing the council." "I've withdrawn from the stabilizing network," I replied. That landed. The difference mattered. The room didn't tilt. It shuddered. One of the alphas swore under his breath. Another rose abruptly, chair legs shrieking against glass. Matthew's breathing became audible. "This isn't how it's supposed to feel," he said. No, it wasn't. He'd grown up in rooms that carried him, not ones that exposed him. "You said you wanted visibility," I told him quietly. "This is it." Richard's control fractured next, not in fury, in something worse. Disbelief. "You're a beta," he said. "Not as an insult, as a category error. You were designed to regulate," he continued. "To support, not to be central," I finished. I gestured to the room. "Yet without my integration, you cannot maintain coherence long enough to finish this meeting." The screens proved it. Stability curves spiked and fell. Internal communication lagged. Predictive models bloomed red. "You built this company on dominance alignment," I said. "I rebuilt it on functional dependence." Silence thickened. "You don't sit at the top of this system," I continued. "You move through it." Richard's mouth opened. Closed. Matthew looked between us. For the first time, he looked small. "You told me I'd lead," he said, voice thin. Richard didn't answer, because there was no longer a structure that supported the lie. A director at the far end of the table finally spoke. Low, measured. "We can't proceed." Another nodded. "Not like this." A third exhaled. "He's not replaceable." The words were not praise. They were recognition. I felt something inside my chest release. Not triumph. Tension. Years of it. Richard sank back into his chair. He looked older, not defeated, but suddenly aware of the architecture he'd been standing on without understanding. The room settled into a wary, unstable quiet. I stood where I was, hands loose at my sides, heart finally slowing. What I felt wasn't victory. It was emptiness. The hollow that comes after holding something too heavy for too long. And the unfamiliar lightness of realizing I didn't have to carry it alone anymore. The closed session was smaller, not in number, in sound. No live feeds, no external screens, no city watching through glass. Just the board, the table, and the uncomfortable awareness that the old hierarchy no longer fit. They'd dismissed legal, communications, assistants. Only decision-makers remained. Only consequences. Richard sat apart now, not isolated, decentered. The chair at the head of the table was still empty. It no longer felt symbolic. It felt available. "We need to stabilize leadership," said Director Hanley, fingers steepled. "Immediately. The market will move on speculation within hours." "Agreed," another added. "The question is visibility. We require an alpha presence. Someone the external sectors will respond to." Several gazes slid, not subtly, toward Callum. He didn't react. Instead, he said, "No." The word landed clean. "I am not assuming executive command," he continued, "nor acting as interim authority." Richard's head snapped up. "You've already positioned yourself as opposition," Callum replied. "Not replacement." Silence followed. "If you install me," he went on, "you'll reinforce the very fiction that nearly collapsed this system. That authority here is a matter of projection." "Then who?" someone asked sharply. "Do you propose?" Callum didn't answer. He looked at me. The room did too. "I won't be your compromise," I said. A few brows furrowed. "I won't be placed here because you need a stabilizer," I continued. "And I won't accept the chair so you can reassure yourselves that nothing has changed." Richard laughed once. It held no warmth. "You expect us to make a beta the face of Heir Global?" "No," I replied. "I expect you to recognize that Heir Global already has a face." I stepped forward, not to the chair, to the center. "You've been searching for dominance to govern what is no longer a dominance-based system," I said. "Your expansion, your internal design, your crisis survivability, all of it depends on integrated regulation." I gestured to the silent screens. "You can install an alpha and spend the next decade compensating for the structural instability that follows," I said. Or you can formalize the architecture that is already holding you together. I met their eyes, one by one. I am not here to serve authority, I continued. I am here to be it. No pressure accompanied the words. No field. No performance. Only clarity. What you built cannot survive without him, Director Hanley said slowly. And it will fracture if you remove him. Another nodded. The models are unequivocal. Richard stared at me. Not with anger, with something closer to recalculation. And what, he asked, would your leadership look like? Distributed, I said. Transparent. Designed to reduce alpha convergence, not depend on it. With external partnership to monitor capital flow and internal systems insulated from legacy control. Partnership, someone echoed. Callum inclined his head. I will step out of the investor coalition and into a regulatory alliance, not above, beside. The room breathed. Slowly. Then Director Hanley spoke again. All in favor of formalizing Ethan Hale as Chief Executive Officer. Hands lifted. Not eagerly, not dramatically, but one by one. Measured. Irreversible. The last to move was Richard. When his hand rose, the sound it made was not applause. It was something far quieter. The sound of an old structure acknowledging a new one. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. The victory didn't ring. It settled, like something finally placed where it had always belonged. The CEO's office didn't look the way I expected. No excessive gold. No theatrical scale. Just height, space, light. The windows stretched from floor to ceiling, curving slightly with the architecture of the tower. The city lay beneath them, in layered silence, grids of light dissolving into mist at the horizon. The desk was wide, clean, untouched. The chair waited, mine. I closed the door. The sound was soft, final. For a long moment I didn't move. There was no alpha field here, no board density, no narrative pressure. Only the quiet hum of a building built to serve a structure that now included me. I stepped forward slowly, like someone entering a room where they weren't sure they were allowed to breathe. The desk still smelled faintly of polish and paper. Someone had arranged a minimalist sculpture at the far end. Curved metal, abstract, easily moved. I almost smiled at that. Almost. I set my palm on the edge of the desk. My hand was shaking. Not from fear. From release. When your nervous system runs crisis for long enough, it doesn't know what to do with peace. It waits for alarms. It braces against absence, like it's a trick. I lowered myself into the chair. Leather. Cool. Supportive. The city shifted slightly beneath my new line of sight. I hadn't realized how long I'd been standing. Behind. Beside. Under. I closed my eyes. Images rose uninvited. Servers humming at 3 a.m, crisis rooms lit like operating theaters, my uncle's hand on my shoulder, Matthew's careless smile, Callum's voice cutting through a pressure field like a tuned instrument, all the versions of myself that had existed to maintain something, to absorb, to stabilize, to remain. My chest hitched, just once. I let it. I'm not infrastructure, I said quietly to the empty room. The words didn't need witnesses. I'm not a background process. I opened my eyes. The city waited. So did the systems. So did the future everyone kept trying to define for me. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was protecting a machine. I felt like I was inhabiting a position, not as a beta, not as a compromise, but as a choice. The thought settled into my bones, not like ambition, but like alignment. Relief followed it. Warm, unsteady, real. I leaned back and breathed, not because the room allowed it, but because I did. The office had changed by evening, not in layout. In temperature, the city beyond the glass had softened into bands of amber and blue. Traffic lines curved like slow rivers. The building's internal lights dimmed automatically, shifting the space into something almost human. I was still at the desk when the door chimed. Once, then again. Come in. Callum entered without the formal precision he'd worn all day. His jacket was off. His sleeves rolled. He looked like someone who had finished a long operation and survived it. "It's done," he said. I lifted a brow. "Which part?" "All of it." He crossed the room and stopped a respectful distance from the desk. "I've formally withdrawn from the investor coalition," he continued, "returned my controlling shares, terminated my reporting contracts." I studied him. "That was your shield?" "Yes." "And your leverage?" "Yes." "You just dismantled both." He exhaled. "I dismantled a role." Silence, stretched. "Then why are you here?" I asked. "Because," Callum said, "I don't want another one assigned." I stood. Not because I needed to, because I wanted to meet him on equal ground. "You could leave," I said. "Consult, audit, take another corporation apart from the inside." "I could," he agreed. And instead I'd like to stay," he said. "If you'll have me." "As what?" Callum's gaze didn't drop. "Not as an alpha," he said. "Not as a handler. Not as capital." He gestured, lightly, between us. "As a partner." The word hung there. Not dramatic. Deliberate. "In structure," he clarified. "In oversight. In building what comes next. And personally," I added. A corner of his mouth lifted. I was hoping we'd discover that part without submitting a proposal. I almost laughed. Almost. "What happens when this gets complicated?" I asked. "When the board watches. When the press names us. When every move becomes interpreted." "Then," he replied, "we'll have something in common with every meaningful alliance in history." I leaned back against the desk. "You're very calm about attaching yourself to a system you just helped destabilize." Callum tilted his head. "I prefer systems that can change." We stood there, the city breathing beneath us. "You chose," I said quietly. "Yes, you weren't sent to." "No." The simplicity of it did something to me. Not fireworks. Gravity. He stepped closer. Not into my space. Into my orbit. "Ethan," he said, "I won't pretend this is clean. Or safe. Or strategically optimal. I would worry if you did." His eyes warmed. "Good." I looked past him briefly, at the city, then back. "Stay," I said. Callum nodded. Not like someone receiving permission, like someone accepting alignment. He moved to the side of the desk instead of across from it. Didn't take the other chair. Just stood there. Present. Beside. I returned to the CEO's seat. The leather adjusted. The city spread beneath us. Light. Motion. Possibility. I rested my hands on the arms of the chair. Callum leaned one hip against the desk, close enough that I could feel the quiet heat of him without any trace of pressure. No field. No cage. Just space. And two people who had chosen to remain inside it. Together. The system no longer closed around me. It opened. And this time, I didn't step into it alone.